Last year, I released an album titled In Transit, and today I'm going to break down the album for you and to let you know some of my intentions behind the album and also to answer some questions. This is supposed to mark 6 months since the album. I think this album took around 3 months, but some of the ideas in the album were old ideas, so I just decided to develop them for this album. I don't know whether listening to this will affect your experience with the album, but I do hope that this provides a little bit more understanding and context towards what you hear and what you see from the album. Okay, so the title of this album, In Transit, it actually took inspiration from the continuity and the progression of life. I realized that being in transit is actually a universal theme that many people are able to relate to, because ultimately we are all on our own journeys through life and we are all headed towards different destinations. While we all go through each of our own journeys and we face different challenges, but I realized that we are all connected in the sense that we are all going down a path of our own. I felt that I wanted to use my personal experiences as a springboard to reflect more on common sub-themes through this album, with the main theme being journeys. I tried to translate these life concepts into music. And I also wanted to try to form a more meaningful and a deeper emotional connection with listeners through this album. In Transit is actually the second album that I wrote and released. It's actually a continuation of my exploration of these theme journeys. A third album will be released at the end of this year in December, and it will also be about journeys, something to look forward to. Looking back on this second album, I feel that it was an archive of my teenage experiences to capture those moments. There's never any moment that's the same. When I was writing this album, I did not actively think about how I wanted to arrange the tracks. But looking back, I realized that there was actually a pattern that I went for. The first half of the album, the first 3 pieces, Illuminate, Unspecified and Boom, they are works for electronic instruments. So I used instruments on GarageBand to create the music. And then the middle piece at Crossroads is an intersection of electronic instruments with live violin. It actually serves as a transition between the completely electronic pieces to live piano and live harp. Apart from being like a musical transition, it's also an intersection between music and dance, and I made a dance film to this track as an extension of the album. The second half, that means the last 3 tracks, Saunter, Clavier and It's Just the Beginning, they were more of pieces that I recorded live instruments on. They have a calmer and a more soothing character as compared to the first half, where it was more of an exploration of different types of sounds that I could create. So I'm going to go into a brief breakdown of each piece. The first piece is called Illuminate. I also wanted to start the album on a high note because I felt that this reflects a sense of positivity and high points along a journey. So this piece actually took inspiration from the positive energy and the happiness from my friends in school. My friends showed me how this concept of people in community is actually really fundamental in all of our lives. I think this idea of illuminating and brightening up one's life also extends beyond the joys that can be created by other people. And so I was trying to tie this back to the whole idea of each of us constantly being on the journey of trying to find our purpose and our passions, and things that carry us through the days where we feel tired, or things that light up our lives and spark joy and positivity in the darkness. I ended up listening to this track a lot during my exams last year. If you want to do that, please go ahead. Okay, so musically, I actually went in with the sole intention of translating this sense of positive energy into music. I used the harps that you find on GarageBand, because playing the harp and writing for the harp is one of the things that makes me very happy. So I started with this comfortable starting ground to springboard the rest of the album. The harps actually remain quite consistent in the background of the music, and this reflects how there are certain things in life which are constantly there for us to fall back on. There are also bell-like sounds used, and this was actually partially inspired by the festive Christmas spirit that was a few months early. I wanted to try to infuse a little bit of the festive experience into my music. Towards the end, it does sound like the music gets a little bit busier, and this is to reflect how friends or things that light up our lives can actually create a lot of excitement. It took me 2 months to write this piece because I felt like I was sort of in a slump, especially after I finished writing my first album. I didn't really actively write music after that. I just rested. But I chose to take my time with this piece instead of rushing things. When I did this piece, I wanted to focus on ensuring that nothing felt forced. Second piece is called Unspecified. I honestly don't know what I wanted out of this piece. I just went with the flow and wrote it, and I did it in 2 days because I felt inspiration flowing. So it's very different from the first one, which took 2 months. I wanted to try to write something that was slightly more contemplative and reflective, while trying to explore how I can fully develop musical ideas that I introduce in the music instead of leaving the ideas raw and undeveloped. I was also trying to explore different sounds that I could create. I found myself falling back on the bell-like sounds again to create a more Christmas sounding album, because anyway, this album itself was released on Christmas. Musically wise, this was created completely on GarageBand electronically, and I used synthesizers quite a lot. I thought a lot about the structure of this piece. It actually follows an ABA structure, just a ternary structure. So I deviated from the original theme in the middle of the piece, and I introduced something new before the first theme came back, so ABA. I wanted to highlight the difference in the character between the two sections. So I did this by changing instruments and by removing the beat in the middle section to create a slightly less rhythmically driven effect. I also wanted to avoid having the music sound too repetitive or boring, and I wanted to create a calming texture. Even at the ending, when I reintroduced my theme, I tried to develop my beats so it did not sound exactly the same as it did when it was first introduced. The third piece, Boom, was something that I actually started working on in September 2019, but at that time I didn't really have any inspiration, so I took a break, so I finished it in December 2019. It started out with a simple rhythmic and melodic idea, and then after that I was just hit by inspiration, so I just continued to develop ideas that I was fascinated with. I think this particular composition was something that I really enjoyed writing because I really felt like I was expanding out of my comfort zone. The instruments that I used in this composition and the general character and atmosphere of it is quite different. When I was writing this composition, I felt like I was going more for a jungle sort of atmosphere where everything sounds a little bit more mysterious. I had the image of a lion in my mind while I did it. It's one of the few pieces that I feel that portrays a very different side of the music that I usually write. I felt that this would also provide nice contrast to the rest of the pieces in the album. The title Boom actually is meant to reflect some sort of reverberation where the sounds expand. And this is a metaphor of me trying to expand beyond my comfort zone. I would describe it as more of quirky and groovy. This was also quite a short piece, 1 minute and 9 seconds. I don't know why it's so short, but I went with the flow and I left it completely up to me being spontaneous. The fourth piece is called At Crossroads. Okay, this piece is definitely one that has a greater personal significance to me. So I approached this piece with the end result in mind. I wanted to write music that I could dance to, and I also wanted to see whether the dance inspires or adds something new to the music, so it's the whole chicken and egg debate. I also thought a little bit about other academic concepts that I've learned from school, and I tried to draw parallels with other ideas that I have been exposed to see how this concept of crossroads actually extends beyond its personal significance to me to encompass a greater range of ideas that other people can also relate to. But I kept these thoughts at the back of my mind and just let them inspire me in their small ways. Okay, so my approach towards this piece was first identifying the personal significance of this piece to me. I then conducted some research and I learned more about Crossroads, and I also applied my academic subjects. The idea of Crossroads is being an intersection between two or more roads. It could also mean a point at which a crucial decision must be made, which will have far-reaching consequences. This significance of crossroads, it really ties into being in transit, because I think it really needs one to understand oneself and to find meaning and purpose in life before you can decide what you want to do when you reach a crossroad in your life. Crossroads are definitely unavoidable, and they are an integral part of every individual's journey. I think the idea of trying to identify ways to navigate at those crossroads is something that more people will be able to relate to. I feel that there are certain emotions associated with crossroads, It could be eye-opening, it could provide endless room for discovery, and it could be fascinating, but it could also be a very stressful and nerve-wracking experience. I found the versatility of the theme of Crossroads interesting. I'll add in the application of my academic subjects very briefly. So for economics, I felt that being at Crossroads also implied this opportunity cost. You have to sacrifice one thing to make time for another. As for the music, I wrote it while I was watching people ice skate. I started off by writing the chords, but I ended up writing music that sounded a little bit more dark. Beyond the music, when I was making the dance film, I felt that I wanted to try to make dance a visual representation of the music by having the dance highlight certain prominent features of the music. When I was going through this process, I also started to notice the smaller things in the music that I had not really noticed before, and I could make a more deliberate decision about whether I wanted to highlight an aspect of the music or whether I wanted it to be more in the background. And if I wanted to highlight it, for example this part over here, I decided to synchronize my leg movements with the music to highlight those two sounds in the music. The dance was actually site-specific. It was half choreographed and half improvised because I wanted to see how the physical environment would inspire me. I wrote the music and then I choreographed part of the film, and then my friend Joni helped me to film the footage. I feel that both the dance and the film aspects were quite improvised. We were just going with the flow, and I think that was a very interesting part of the entire experience because it was more of an exploration to see how the end product would turn out to be instead of trying to force something out of this project. I also ended up adjusting the music slightly based on the amount of dance footage that I wanted to use. So the music that you hear for the bulk of the dance film is actually from the track at Crossroads itself, but towards the end of the dance film I had extra footage that I wanted to use. So I used the music that I wrote for the trailer for my album, which took inspiration from a heartbeat, and I added that in, and I felt that this was actually quite suitable because the heartbeat is very repetitive and the length of the heartbeat track that I added was very flexible and I could stop when I wanted to stop. In my opinion, the track that imitated the sound of the heartbeat also sounded a little bit more mysterious because the heartbeat was the only thing in the track. It also reflects a sense of nervousness and anxiety that could come with the experience of being at Crossroads. In the film, you will notice stark contrast between bright and dark frames, and this highlights the difference in the emotions that we could experience when we arrive at a crossroad. I also did a back row, and Joni focused on my feet. The feet actually represents footsteps and how we use our feet to steer ourselves in the direction that we want to go in. When I was editing the dance film, I also used a lot of overlay to hint at the duality of being at a crossroad, where we might sometimes find ourselves constantly in a dilemma between two choices which seem equally as appealing. Okay.